Hello, welcome to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast. Once again with your hosts Bernhard Gunther and my wife Laura Matsu. And this episode we dive deeper into this topic on the time of transition and the seeds of the new world. So that's a big one, obviously relating to current events and what the future may hold with the craziness that's happening in the world and within humanity. And we really want to dive deeper, specifically about the term time of transition, because we have talked about this a lot in our retreats in the past in Peru have been called time of transition. Even our online course, 10-week private coaching program is called Time of Transition, Embodied Soul Awakening, which, by the way, we just started. Enrollment is closed. It filled up once again the fourth time. And we're taking a group of 25 people on the journey, and we most likely will do it again sometime later this year. So keep your ears and eyes open. Sign up to the mailing list at veilofreality.com. And we have future offerings as well, other courses coming up as well. But going back to the topic on this time of transition, a lot of people have asked us, what does it mean? Where did you get it from? Well, we are in the time of transition. And what it means that many various different esoteric traditions have talked about this epoch, this age we're in right now, that we're in a transition between ages. And this is why a lot of the things are happening as they're happening now, as dark as it is, but there is a transformation happening, a transition. There's an opportunity, so to speak. There's no guarantee, but there's an opportunity to rise up to a higher level, so to speak. But the term time of transition itself is something I got from esoteric Christianity, based on Boris Moravyia's work in his trilogy called Gnosis. Gnosis 1, 2, 3. I've quoted him quite a bit over the years in my writings, if you have followed them on my website, veilofreality.com. And he talks about the time of transition, right? From the esoteric Christian perspective, which is basically the common era of the Holy Spirit, right? Or, you see it in other traditions, the Golden Age or whatnot, or the Age of Aquarius and whatnot, which we'll also be talking about it from the astrological lens about this time of transition. But going back to Moravyia's work in Gnosis, which, by the way, I can highly recommend to read. These are, for me, the really true core esoteric Christian teachings way before the church distorted it, corrupted it, made it into a dogma and whatnot. But I'm going to quote him from this book. The quote I've written about a few times before, but I'm extending it here a little bit. So ultimately, also just as a preface, this time of transition, as it said, it's the common area of the Holy Spirit, and there's the need. What he talks about on esoteric Christianity, they talk about the need for a new man, a new human being, to create conditions which will offer maximum opportunities to seekers who wish to develop their personality and reach the second birth. So it's about the second birth. And second birth, we see this even in the Jesus metaphor of rising from the dead, or the rebirth, the second birth, so to speak, is an analogy to be reborn in our true self, to spiritualize our being. And we see this also in other traditions, Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga, the need to spiritualize man. And that's really what it comes down to, the second birth. The new man needs to have a strong spiritual foundation. The whole being needs to be spiritualized. That's why, again, it's so important to engage in the great work on all levels. But here's the quote. With the approach of the era of the Holy Spirit, everything must be gradually brought to the light of day, not only the secrets of the laboratory, but the deepest meanings of esotericism. The same must happen with illusions, errors, and lies, which must also be revealed so they can later be rectified. The world is suffering from a lack of harmony which gets deeper on every plane, and this is a serious danger to the moral and spiritual recovery of humanity. It also involves a serious risk of failure in the last stage of this time of transition that we are now entering. If this risk is not overcome, the deluge of fire awaits us. We will have to make an immense effort toward of this fate, and we have very little time in which to do it. Man has only himself to blame for the greatness of the effort needed. This is the result of his obstinate refusal to heed the warnings that have been addressed to him time and again by the divine voice. just as he continues today to blind himself to the fact that the deluge of fire is being made ready. That is now technically feasible and, it must be said, morally possible. This final cataclysm towards which humanity is advancing so blindly can only be avoided by the conscious super efforts of the spiritual elite, right, the spiritual warriors, especially by young enthusiastic elements of the present generation, those which follow it, whose esoteric predispositions will make them fit assume key position in all races and in all nations. That also may be relating to the generation of the Pluto generation Aquarius we can talk about.
Yeah.
Neither the most marvelous technical progress nor greater refinements of the intellectual faculties will be enough to enable us to remedy the state of affairs which is still deteriorating. Before the earth can enter the era of the Holy Spirit, the time of transition must reach a successful outcome, and this outcome will in turn depend on a positive answer to a whole group of problems which will be solved by the appearance of the new spiritualized man, human being. So that's end quote. So that's really sets the stage of what we want to talk about. And there's a lot to unpack, even this quote alone, even the necessity to efforts, right? Conscious evolution doesn't happen by itself. It's not about trying to change the outside. It's the inner transformation that is so important. And this is the work we need to engage in, right? This deeper spiritual work on all levels, and all need to be revealed, all lies, all errors, not only out in the world out there, but within ourselves. And there needs to be a new kind of human being to engage in this work. And he also talks about, many other traditions have talked about this as well, including Sri Aurobindo integral yoga or the Hopi, even Native Americans. There's a way up, a way down. There's an opportunity, but also a possibility of a cataclysm of the quote-unquote divine pressing the reset button, as it happened many times before, right? Atlantis times, Lemurian times, and whatnot. So we are in a very fragile state right now. But I just wanted to set the stage for that before we can also then talk it from other traditions, but also from the astrological perspective.
Yeah, it's very fascinating because we have Saturn in Aquarius right now, and then Pluto is going to enter Aquarius in 2023, which does give me hope for the future, because right now, astrologically speaking, we are in this Pisces Virgo axis. So we are in the age of Pisces, but basically near the end of that age, it actually takes on the opposite sign, which is Virgo, and the qualities of Virgo. And you see this, this so much in the world, especially, the shadow side of Virgo, because it's meant to be a time of purification, of discipline, of service, of developing humility. And the shadow side of Virgo can actually, be this overly critical side who uses this feedback from the outer world as a form of self-punishment. There's this over-sanitizing hypochondriac behavior that's definitely a Virgo trait, and some of the themes that Patricia Walsh gave for Virgo, I'm just going to read them out. It's about, and these are all across the spectrum, good and bad. It's about inferiority, service. It's also about slavery. It's about apprenticing. It's about humility and humiliation, criticism, as I said, guilt, masochism, crisis. Virgo is actually a crisis sign, by the way. You reach a point of crisis. It's also about the victim. It's about the persecuted, self-sacrifice, discipline, shame, perfection, finding your place in society. It's also about holistic medicine. It is about medicine in general and about healing, and it's about self-improvement. So, you see this on all sides of the spectrum. We do have a lot of people who are really interested in self-work and improving themselves, and then we also see this, almost like this worship of like medicine, mainstream medicine and doctors and whatnot. So you see all sides of it, and basically, the age of Aquarius, like the Kali Yuga, is also debated astrologically when it starts. Some people say we're already in it. It started in 2012. But Dane Rudger, who's a really great, he's like one of the kind of forefathers of astrology as we know it now. He determined that this, the last precessional age of Pisces began in 100 BC. And since the world age is 2160 years, the official age of Aquarius begins in the age of 2060. And he considered that the last 10% of each age, which is the age we're in now, is the seed period, which will influence the next time. So basically, since we are in this kind of transition point, ending this age of Pisces, Virgo, and we're entering into the Aquarius Leo axis, the seeds of this new world are already starting. And I'm also going to give you some of the themes of the Uranian archetype by Jeffrey Wolfgreen, because it's very, very fascinating. And he says, Uranus correlates to individuation, liberation, freedom, and deconditioning. Deconditioning from what? Deconditioning from Saturn. Saturn correlates to all the conditioning patterns of our life, the conditioning patterns of society, family, expectations of people in our lives, and the conditioning patterns relative to all prior lives that you bring into this life. All that conditions your sense of identity at any moment in time. Uranus is clearly antithetical to the archetype to Saturn. This means that Uranus is forever trying to shatter, revolutionize, liberate, or break free from all of these conditioning patterns. What for? What is the intent? To what purpose? If we shatter the conditioning patterns that define our sense of personality and identity, then we can at some point arrive at our essential nature and identity that is unconditioned. So that's actually why the individuation process is really key to this. So a lot of people who get into this kind of spiritual bypassing kind of mindset are like, all is one. We should embrace non-dual consciousness, etc. Don't promote division or whatever. They're actually skipping this 11th house Aquarius, Uranus individuation process. You know, you need to actually become a unique individual before you can actually act. And by the way, just for the record, I haven't seen one person who talks about non-dual consciousness who is truly there. Most people just use this as a spiritual bypass.
It's like a philosophical, intellectual.
It's a philosophical, intellectual understanding. I've like reached that state once, and it lasted like 10 hours being in the world after like 10 days or it's actually 2 weeks of silent meditation. Because the thing is the world will bring you back into life, and the world, like, you actually have to individuate. You actually have to have an opinion. You have to know what you think. And, you know, right now, you see mainstream academia, mainstream medicine, mainstream government, even the royal family or whatever, all of these Saturnian systems that have existed as actually a control mechanism over the world, they are disintegrating. Yeah. So to me, the signs that we're actually like I really very much believe Dane Rudger's prediction that 2060, which may seem like a long time away to some people, but as far as historical, like, you know, if you look at it, the whole history of the Earth, it's nothing exactly. Yeah. So what we have now, and what Dane Rudger talked about, and I think we talked about it on their podcast, but I'm going to reiterate, is we have the seed people for this new era who hold this Uranian Aquarius template, who are individuals, who are deconditioning from these patterns of society. They are already here, you know, and these are the seeds of the new world. So you can either identify with the dying world, you know, or you can identify and create the new world. And this has actually been going on for decades now.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, because that's exactly what Boris Moravia, from an esoteric Christian perspective, talked about, the quote spiritual elite, which is not the elite or power elite out there and the psychopaths, but the spiritual elite, what he called us the children of light, the seed people, you know, which many of us are. And I also want to touch upon what you just mentioned. This is very important to understand, because, and it's very beautifully mirrored in evolutionary astrology, as you just mentioned. You see this in Jung's work as well, the need to individuate, right? Yes. To become your own person. And you see this in other traditions, in the esoteric traditions as well. You see it in Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga, who has also mapped out the evolution of consciousness based on his own, you know, enlightening experiences and downloads and based on true gnosis. And understanding how everything, again, happens as it needs to happen. There's no error in creation, even right now with mental men. Yes, we're stuck in the head and whatnot, but that's part of the evolution of consciousness, which we need. It's not the end of it. We are a transitional being. But we see this right now. It's very fascinating what you say, because the quote ending of the age of Pisces, ending moving into age of Aquarius, and Aquarius is all about also the unique individual in a sense, right?
Yes.
But also humanity and then the bigger picture and whatnot. And Pisces age is also, which we're getting away from, is also dogmatic religion or belief. So we're getting away from belief to true gnosis.
Yes.
And what we see right now, we see this even in the world, is this fight or the friction between people who want to individuate, be themselves, their own personal freedom, think for themselves, versus the group, the herd that just goes along with, or the globalists, right? Which is forced unity.
Yes.
It's conformity. It's not a natural unity.
Yeah,
right?
Which is fascinating, because Dane Rudger actually talked about the dangers of this. And I'm kind of skipping ahead here, that we need this integration of diversity, basically, rather than tribalism. So we need individual responsibility, as well as even a common humanity, and even, this great reset and cultural. He actually even named cultural Marxism as being almost like the dark side of this forced unity, and then he gave examples like Sri Aurobindo's Auroville, or even he uses the Baha'i religion, which kind of combines all these different religious philosophies under one umbrella, as being this more spiritualized unity. Or you can have this totalitarian unity that could clamp down as well, where the darkness will try and force unity through world communism, is what he said. And so it's fascinating, because he wrote this book in the late 60s, and he was just predicting based on what he knows. He's an amazing astrologer, and we see that happening now. The forced unity through the Great Reset, and also this world communism through true unity, and true unity. And we have to move away from this tribalism, which is what cultural Marxism is all about, is like you're identified by your race, by, exactly. And it's not looking at the qualities of the individual, so it's looking at the qualities of the individual rather than identifying them as part of the racial group. And I'm not saying that racial backgrounds don't affect people, they do, but it's also up to the individual choices as well.
And there's also the trap of identification.
Exactly.
But I want to add on to that as well. Really fascinating what you said about, we see Marxism, by the way, is a satanic ideology. Literally.
Yeah,
I mean, that's, if you research where Marx got his ideology from in philosophy, he was in many ways a Satanist, anti-divine.
There's a book actually called Karl Marx and Satan, I think it's called. If you just Google Karl Marx and Satan, it'll come up, where he was a poet early on in life, and he was literally talking about these satanic beings that were coming through him in his poetry.
And by the way, also just to put in context, we also put in context what's happening right now with the leftist pathological woke ideology, which are based on cultural Marxism. You can turn it any way or other, but that is the truth. Even BLM, Antifa, the founders are self-proclaimed Marxists, and all of that. And it has infiltrated institutions going back with the Fabian Society and Frankfurt School. So this is a whole topic in itself. Yeah. But I want to touch upon also, which is really fascinating, going back to Boris Moravie's quote, that, we have avoided the signs. We have not seen the signs all along. The signs have been all along, right?
Yeah.
But people are just mechanically conditioned, wounded, programmed. There's not much free will. You cannot actually have true free will until you're individualized. No, by the way, exactly. If you're part of a group, the herd, the mainstream, you're not individualized. And you live in the delusion of free will. But on that note, Sri Aurobindo also in his book, Human Unity, over 100 years ago in 1919, also predicted what's happening now. He predicted literally the rise of a socialist centralized state, a one world government, which we are moving towards, so a socialist control, right? Mm-hmm. And he mentioned the danger of globalism and the individual losing all freedom under global socialist control, right? Which is also the agenda of what he calls the occult Zurich dark forces. So he was literally also predicting this socialist new world order, and also hinted at the possibility of complete destruction, right? What Muraviev called the delusion of fire, or the mother called the dark night of civilization, the death of life, and the necessity to repeat the cycle, right? So, and I quote Sri Aurobindo here, right? That the centralized mechanical world state must rouse in the end a similar force against it, and might well end in a crumbling up and disintegration, even in the necessity for the repetition of the cycle of humanity, ending in the better attempt to solve the problem. So what he means that, with the rise of the socialist centralist state, which we're literally, it's happening now as we speak, right? It's anti-divine. It goes against divine truth. So, as it happened, as I mentioned before, in ancient history, not official history, ancient history, ancient civilizations, then, there will be a cataclysm to start this whole human experiment over, because everything moves in cycles over and over, right?
Yeah.
But we do have an opportunity still to make the right choice. So we are right now literally in an archetypal battle between dark and light. And there is polarization, there's division. As you mentioned, we cannot use these spiritual bypass terms of let's not be divisive, let's just we're all in this together. No, we're not. The splitting of humanity becomes more and more obvious, which we see people make choices with the health, with the vaccine, people going along with the agenda, as opposed to people who really see through it. And also, most importantly, people who are truly engaged in the work to spiritualize the being.
Yeah, trust the experts is like a Saturnian mantra, basically.
Right.
It's like trust Saturn, trust the structures that already exist. But he actually also, Dane Rutger also said something very interesting, which gave me some, faith in the future, is that there's going to be this downflow of new spiritual and cosmic energies, which is going to pervade and impregnate the Earth's biosphere,
Right.
the materials of nature and the human psyche, which will be a new type of matter. And he says because of this new energy being released, the people born at this time will also have supernormal powers of perception, So there's going to be a descent of this energy, which is going to be very Aquarian, and the consciousness and the future culture that will be created will be very Leo near the end of this age, which we won't be alive for anymore, So there is basically this descending spiritual energy, which is why we can use these Virgo energies of purification, of self-improvement, of developing humility, and also decondition ourselves from the structures of Saturn, meaning, not noticing how your upbringing impacted your beliefs, noticing how culture impacted you, how the university you went to impacted your belief system. Is that's actually what we need to decondition from. And the thing is, in evolutionary astrology, Aquarius, Uranus is also a trauma signature, because taking that step from the Capricorn 10th house lesson to 11th house Aquarius Uranus lesson is a traumatic process. Yeah. There could actually even be mass trauma, which I think we're seeing now, So yes. for a lot of people who have decided to stay firm in what they believe, to speak out, to individuate from the crowd, that's what you're doing when you speak out right now, is the herd mentality basically believes that vaccines are safe. If you don't wear a mask, you're a crazy far-right conspiracy theorist or whatever, But if you're individuating from that, you don't actually have the comfort of the status quo. So most people actually, their whole identity centers around the times that they live in, So all of their beliefs is if they ask a question, what should I do with my life? They look to society and culture in order to get that answer, So it is a traumatic process to go through that individuation process, because you have to break free from the known world. It's a rebirth. It's a rebirth. Yes, it's a rebirth. And hopefully it brings you back to your essential individuated nature before all of that conditioning took place. And that conditioning starts very young as well. Even learning about trauma, our nervous systems start being conditioned in utero. So we have a deep amount of conditioning to undo on multidimensional levels. It's not only questioning the beliefs that society, that your family project on you and then you take on out of guilt and shame or whatever, or obligation. That's another aspect of Capricorn Saturn, is taking responsibility for things that are not your responsibility to begin with, And it's also, by the way, and this leads us into a good topic, that it's understanding the nature of judgment. Another thing that you hear in the spiritual community be oh, we shouldn't judge, I don't ever judge, you're making judgments all the time. When you cross the street, you're making a judgment. Is it safe to go across the street? And the nature of judgment is actually really important. And it's a Capricorn Saturn lesson, because the nature of judgment teaches us, okay, this is what my family told me that's useful, that I can take forward, and this is what's not useful. So we need to have that level of discernment happening in our mind. Otherwise, we take in either too many projections from the outer world, or we take in none of them at all, And
especially in this day and age, you cannot stand on the sideline. I see many people very well-meaning people, but they take also maybe what you talked about before, the non-duality bypass.
Yes.
Right, standing on the sidelines, sitting on the fence, and like everyone is right in their own way. We're all this together, not really making a stand. But this woo-woo in between state actually keeps this person stuck, and you are fooling yourself, deceiving yourself to be more evolved than you actually are. Right, it's kind of like almost checking out, dissociating, because again, I'm going back to the various esoteric traditions, all of the talk about even the Bible, many are called, few choose to answer the call. There's a decision to be made, right? And it's either up or way down. There's no middle ground. And the decision is not just a verbal decision on yes, on this and what. It's also based on, your inner wiring, your inner calling of what your inner being, so to speak, as well.
Yeah.
And that's key to understand as well with regards to what you mentioned. With trauma and all of that is undoing to individuate, but it also in light of the evolution of consciousness in terms of soul evolution over lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes, there are many souls that are ripe right now. Many of us that have incarnated for this time of transition right now, and purposely to not only accelerate our own evolution, but to help others as the seeds for the new world.
Yeah.
And there are many others who are level of being who are not individuated, who are actually have no individuated soul whatsoever right now. It ties in the topic of organic portal souls, humans, also part of the evolution of consciousness, who won't wake up in the cycle, and that is just a fact.
Yeah.
There are many, we are beyond the point of return for many people. You cannot, anybody who believes that this cycle over the next few years there will be a collective awakening is deeply disillusioned. Illusion, because there are vast different levels of being with 7 billion people.
Yeah.
And many people won't wake up, and there will be a separation, the splitting of humanity, which the mother talked about as well, and Sri Aurobindo too. Even in esoteric Christianity, the splitting happening, talking about pre-Adamic man and Adamic man, souled versus unsouled. And that's a timeline reality split. It's very hard to fathom for our mind. And it's not the new age thing of just moving. That's another distortion of it, moving into 5D and all of that, and 12D or whatever people talk about.
Yeah.
You're not going physically to any other place. It's just a state of consciousness, a state of being, which definitely reflects reality.
Yeah.
But going back to this judgment, that's why it is important right now to speak out, to speak truth, to counteract the anti-divine forces.
Yeah,
right?
but can I just say something to
go
that?
Go ahead, yeah.
Because when you don't do that, you actually side with the people that you may be against.
That's exactly what's trying to get it. Exactly, your silence at this point is complicit.
Exactly, because that's how they can go along with their program. Is like if you were in school and they were downloading all sorts of like racist theory on you under the guise of critical race theory, and you didn't say anything, then they're going to keep doing that.
That's why I see, like, for all listeners out there, whatever if you have conscience, if you see what's wrong but you stay silent, that's on you, right? Maybe that's a bit rough.
It is, but I also got to
revolutionary. But I have to say, at some point, like, it is a matter of what we need to learn from history. The silence of humanity's, the obedience of just going along or not saying anything is what lets these anti-divine forces, evil forces, roam as they want.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
So it needs to be. And I'm referring to something we posted on Facebook the other day on a Telegram channel, a very powerful speech by Jordan Peterson, the importance of speaking truth and what never underestimate the effect it has.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be easy because that's why most people don't want to speak out, because they're afraid of conflict. They want to be attacked, they don't want to be shunned, and all of that. But no matter what, if in this evolution of consciousness, there will always be friction. There will always be forces that trying to counteract that impulse.
Yeah, and to the extent that you've already individuated before this happened, which I already individuated from a lot of, not all of it, but a lot of the conditioning of my family, of culture, of my peers, starting in 2012. Whereas if you went to like Harvard and your whole social network is a bunch of these people who follow along with the consensus programming, that's why it's a traumatic process, is because you will get called all sorts of names. The herd will like scream at you because you're the mob that will scream at you because you're not going along with the program, And Jeffrey Wolf Green even like mapped out that there was 4 evolutionary conditions or states that any one person can be in at any point in their life. And there's also overlap. So it's not like you just occupy one state. And he said in 1993 that 2 to 3% of people were in this dimly evolved state, meaning they just evolved above animal consciousness and they were very dimly aware, maybe even organic portals. But he also gave reference to people who had extreme mental disabilities as well.
Yeah.
So they either de-evolved from a higher state or they had upgraded from an animal state. And then he said, so that's 2 to 3% of the population. And he said 75% of people is in this consensus state, herd mentality, consensus state, meaning all of their beliefs, all of their ideas are a reflection of the society that they incarnated into. So these are people who say, trust the experts, trust the science. Like they just trust whatever external authorities are in control at that time.
Exactly. I think that's where when you look into the concept of organic portals, soulless humans, that's where most of them
are in the consensus.
Because they are connected to a quote soul pool, they're not individuated.
Exactly.
They don't have a mind on their own. Maybe on the illusion of, but what they think and believe is not their own.
Yes. And then he said 20, and this is back in the 90s, his number could change now. Who knows? Maybe it's less, maybe it's more. And then he said 20% of people are in the individuated state. So these are the people who, they'll ask the question, like, who am I? What am I here for? And instead of like going to their parents or university or of their friends, they actually seek those answers within them. They ask questions, they seek the answer within them. So they're retrieving back their essential nature. And then 2 to 3% are in the spiritualized state.
Okay.
So you have to look at it like that's also, I made a post the other day. I was like, you can't convince people who buy into the narrative at this point. Number one, because they're probably not in the evolutionary condition or state where they're individuated. And number two, it's it's just like,
now, if you believe,
you got to see where people are at, where their state of consciousness are at. Yeah. And I think a lot of traps that people tend to fall into on the path is you project the way that you are onto the world.
Your own soul qualities. Yes. And others. That's why also people who still believe you can convince others just by, posting facts, whatever you do, information. It's illusion. It's not going to happen. Maybe a few are already on the verge here and there.
Yes.
But you cannot convince these people at all by information alone. This is ridiculous.
No, the first question you should ask yourself is, can this person think for themselves outside of the consensus? And if it is a possibility, then maybe you can open them up to a new reality. But if not, then
see, that's why it's so key to understand. Like, I'm sorry, I was interrupting, but what you shared by what's his name again? I'm sorry, I forget. Dane Rudger. This chart of the basically really fascinating.
Oh, sorry, that was Jeffrey Wolf Green.
Jeffrey Wolf Green. That really mirrors what I've read, studied in from Muravi's work, Esoteric Christianity, with the organic portals, Adamic man, pre-Adamic man, souled humans versus unsouled humans, ties also into the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, who talked about also the evolution of consciousness, the herd mentality, that pool, that mob mentality, which in light of the illusion of consciousness, the human being needs to individuate first.
Yeah.
You need to individuate first. Mm-hmm. Actually, having a healthy, self-confident ego, you need to separate yourself from the herd first as an individual before you can fully spiritualize your being.
Which is fascinating because, maybe that's also just thinking back at the experience I had at the beginning of 2020 where I was truly, I can't even access it now, but I was truly in the state of like non-dual awareness, disidentification, and then COVID happened. And then I realized I felt I got pulled back down into a lower state. But the fact is I skipped the individuation step because I was still a people pleaser. I was still adapting myself a little bit, scared of what other people could think of me. And then I have to say, the past year, even though people may just see that like, oh, they're so courageous for speaking out, I actually, ignited a lot of trauma that was already existing within me, by the way, through doing this, because all of my old friends like attacked me. They called me all sorts of names like racist, right wing, whatever,
It's always the irony when people call you that.
It's always the people closest to you who are your biggest haters, Right. And like I actually read a quote by Heath Ledger on Facebook the other day. It's like, your biggest fan is someone you don't even know. Your biggest hater is someone close to you. And that's actually what got revealed. Is I was like, like, but the fact of the matter is I was already individuating away from them like since 2012. But then what happened is because my almost individuate got too far from the herd mentality, I became a threat to them. But actually going...
Well, that ties into also, I want to note that obviously, like from an esoteric or occult perspective, they're being used as portals, the Age of Swift syndrome.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
Yeah. So you've seen that with a lot of people, even a lot of people in our coaching programs. The number one thing that they struggle with is that a lot of their friends, a lot of their family, you know, they can't just get along with the consensus with the herd state anymore. And I actually don't see that as a bad thing. It's a sign that they're able to individuate.
You're starting to wake up. Friction is actually a good sign.
Yes. It's a sign that they're starting to individuate. But I also have to say that it is a traumatic process. So, you know, and I've been like exploring this concept a little bit myself and studying astrology, because you don't work with Uranian level trauma in the same way that you work with somatic trauma, but you can use some tools, like you can use nervous system regulation tools, work on your own somatic, you know, work so that you know how to regulate your nervous system, you know how to approach your own traumas, etc. There's all sorts of different ways you can tackle it. But at the same time, you know, this is trauma that also is coming from the higher mind. So this is soul memory, soul trauma. So to give you an example, you know, like, so say if you speak out and then someone you know, calls you all sorts of names, like you're a crazy far-right conspiracy theorist, I can't believe you would believe this stuff, you know, then what happens is the higher mind downloads all sorts of trauma from previous lifetimes where you were killed for speaking out, or where you were cast out of, you know, like really bad things happen to people who spoke out historically. And so a lot of us are actually carrying this evolutionary trauma, basically, especially once you start to even spiritualize your being, you start to even like light up, not all the time, but even like just kind of subconscious soul memories start to filter into your consciousness. It doesn't mean you get an idea of like who, what, where happened, but you get this like download from the higher mind that almost like it's very hard to describe it, but it's very similar to how when you get triggered and you're holding trauma, the past, it gets relived in the present. So you start projecting your trauma onto a situation in the present. Take this to another level. You have trauma from past lifetimes where you've been burned at the stake for speaking your truth. And that's what gets lit up.
Oh, well, I can definitely personally relate to that. You know, if everything I've been through speaking out, and I got definitely publicly attacked, shamed, defamed,
so many
slandered
times,
so many times. And when I became aware of it, especially then also by people I thought were supposed to be my friend, but turned on me, you know, that's when I had this severe trauma response. And I realized, Simone, this is not just a childhood wound. This is something ancient, something like a betrayal, the wound of betrayal, of being stabbed in the back, being burned at the stake and whatnot. I've done some, past life regressions, holographic kinetics, where I was stoned to death and all for speaking truth and all of that. So that's all coming. You don't need to know the story. It's just like, that also like, but the teaching in that is like, okay, there's still something that I need to heal to that, right?
And you had to individuate.
I had to individuate. That's a process, like still standing my ground and moving on into this process of individualization, which also is reflected ironically, or not ironically, but perfectly in alignment with my North Node lesson, right? In Aquarius. To individuate.
Yes.
Right?
And then, who just went through a Uranian traumatic process is actually Donald Trump. And I saw that because he has Sun conjunct Uranus in the North and the North Node there. And when January 6th happened, or around the election, January 6th, he basically had a major Uranus transit. And I even predicted,
the capital.
Exactly. Anyway, so I made a prediction. I was like, either he's going to be a liberator and he's going to be an individuator, which I believe he was for society in many ways, or, and this also happened, 10th house, public house, he got cast out and into the wilderness, and exiled from the status quo entirely, and that's the traumatic signature, is when you get exiled from your friends, from your family, from your community. And that's also kind of feeds into the trauma. And that's the individuation process, because people find a lot of comfort into agreeing with their family, into agreeing with their culture. That gives them a source of security. It's like, the experts agree with me or whatever. Yeah. So when you individuate, it's like, it's a source of tremendous insecurity at first.
So this is the time of individualization. The time of transition is the time of individualization. And going back to what I just mentioned, even Sri Aurobindo talking about other traditions, the evolution of consciousness, first step, getting out of the herd, out of the status quo,
Yes.
the mainstream, to individualize, to become your own being, free
Yes.
from any group, association, free from any identity and all of that. That's a process of
It's deconditioning.
The program is destructive in the sense like Adyashanti would say, it's a destructive process. It's a revelation of anything that's untrue.
Yes.
So it's not an easy process. It can be quite a painful process because you're also facing the lies you've been living along, telling yourself, your attachments, your identification. So and that's what a lot of people are struggling, even when they have that. You mentioned our program with people we work with and whatnot, people still dealing with their attachments to the families, right, who have taken the jab or take a different turn, right? And there's a lot of compassion, but there also needs to be detachment from that, right? It's about
which is another Aquarius lesson.
And what Boris Moraviev talked about, to find the spiritual family, right?
Yes.
The children of light, which is also a lesson of Aquarius, our spiritual, like-minded,
exactly.
true family, and going beyond a blood family.
Yeah, exactly. And he even said that. He said that there's going to be spiritually conscious and compassionate servants of humanity, and they're gonna kind of be brought together, and these are gonna hold the vision for the seed future communities. And he made an example of Auroville, which is, by the way, deviated towards total whatever. It's not even the vision it had.
That was back then.
Yeah, that was back in the 60s though. Yeah. So there is gonna be this meeting of like-minded people who hold this kind of Aquarian template. And I also have to say, just because you're not an Aquarius sun doesn't mean you hold this template. You might have strong 11th house, Uranus aspects, so there's
Pluto, Nodal.
Yeah, there's all sorts of ways that it can play out, but he said there's going to be Gnostic communities which are rising, which will be dedicated to the multifaceted transformation of human beings and which would radiate the higher expression of the Aquarian spirit. So there is a community aspect, and you see that too.
That's also in the work we're doing, actually.
Yes, totally.
Yeah,
I mean, because
the groups, the forum on my website, the coaching program, with the groups they have going on Telegram, and many others doing the same similar work. I just want to mention Shraddha Lu, who I've quoted, who is a scholar of Sri Aurobindo's work, talked also about there are all these pockets of light emerging, the cedars, right? And that's where we need to kind of also start networking and to unite, so to speak.
Yes, exactly. And I like, maybe we can speak more about the second hour, but I can say that the past year you've been going through this kind of like initiation into this Aquarian archetype your whole life, because you have Sun North Node in Aquarius and other, like, so many Aquarian signatures in your chart, but I had to go through it this last year, especially because I realized, I was raised in a hardcore liberal, I was raised by two hippies who joined ashrams in the 60s, who were the templates of this kind of hippie movement, and then they became
almost this faux, Age of Aquarius hippie distortion, right?
Although I have to say it did play an important role in my life. It introduced me to things outside of the status quo at the time. I was introduced to lots of Eastern spirituality very young, But at the same time, my whole life was I was conditioned by a lot of this cultural Marxism, blaming white man for everything that's gone wrong in the world, and just I had to decondition myself from literally the reality that I knew my entire life. Even my parents, my parents are leftists in many ways. They've been champions for this kind of movement. They've actually been almost like the renegades of this movement in a way. But I had to decondition myself. And then when I was left in a kind of no man's land where I had to really learn how to think for myself. What do I believe? Why do I believe that? Where did I get that belief from? These are the kinds of questions you have to really start asking yourself in a sincere way, because all of the beliefs and conditioning that we got from our family, from culture, from university, etc., this is what we're deconditioning and individualizing from. And that's really hard to do on a psychic, on an emotional level, because there is a lot of attachment we have towards that.
Yeah. Great. So let's dive into all this more in the second hour to really talk about the seeds of the new world. How, as the seeders that we are, what this work really entails, what we can do. And I want to talk more about this whole aspect of judgment and the process of individuating, right? Also the necessity to have a healthy ego, before we can actually engage in deeper spiritual work. Too many people throw out the baby with the bathwater of like, oh, the ego is bad. It needs to be, destroyed right away, which is, again, putting the horse in front of the cart, so to speak.
Yeah, and I can talk more about it from the evolutionary astrology perspective, because from the evolutionary, like this has just blown my mind learning about this and over the past couple of years, because you cannot skip steps in the evolutionary process. In fact, if someone, and in our course we talk about this, it's like if you have like a Pluto on the 11th house and you're having difficulty mastering the lessons of the 11th house, you actually have to look to the preceding house. You have to look to the 10th house Capricorn and be like, did I truly master that lesson? Right. So that's what I see in a lot of this kind of spiritual community, is like there's a lot of people. I mean, it's actually a small fraction of people. I actually see a lot more people waking up, which is really great, because keep in mind, there is this, as Dane Rudger said, there's going to be descent of energy.
Well, I wanted to bring this up in a second, but this is exactly what Sri Aurobindo talked about as well, which he was a big part of it, the descent of the supramental consciousness, yes. the divine. It's not only of us going up and reaching, aspiring to the divine, to our higher nature. The light is descending as well. It's trying to anchor itself. Exactly. That's why our bodies are a vehicle for quote-unquote ascension. That's why it's so important to do this inner work, to anchor the divine light, to clear everything out.
Yes.
And that's why everything is in upheaval coming up, because the light is bringing everything out of the shadows within and without.
Exactly. So we can talk more about it in the second hour.
Yeah. And again, if you're not already a member, the second hour is for members. You can become a member subscriber to also support our work. At my website, veilofreality.com. And this will also give you access to all second hours of all podcasts and the membership forum as well. And I want to finish this first hour with the quote by the mother, Mira Alfaza, which was Sri Aurobindo's partner as well. And I think I read that quote before at some point, but it really fits in again. And she said that many years ago. Obviously, she's not alive anymore, but it fits again very perfectly in the times we're in and kind of distills it to what's very important. So here she goes. At the moment, we are at a decisive turning point in the history of the earth, once again. From every side, I'm asked what is going to happen. Everywhere there's anguish, expectation, fear. What is going to happen? There's only one reply. If only man could consent to be spiritualized. And perhaps it would be enough if some individuals became pure gold, for this would be enough to change the course of events. We are faced with the necessity in a very urgent way. The courage, this heroism, which the divine wants of us, why not use it to fight against one's own difficulties, one's own imperfections, one's own obscurities? Why not heroically face the furnace of inner purification, so that it does not become necessary to pass once more through one of those terrible, gigantic destructions which plunge an entire civilization into darkness? This is the problem before us. It is for each one to solve it in his own way. The mother, Mira Alfaza. So this is exactly what we're in right now. We're in a decisive moment in this time of transition, as the Hopi Indian said. There's an way up and a way down. There's an immense opportunity, but not a guarantee, and it depends on each one of us. See you guys in the second hour.